So maybe a first question would be, give us a state of just your tribes. Madison has just been designated in December, Truax Field, as the home of F35A. Doctor, can you start? Give us an overview.
April 1, 2020 is Census Day 2020 across the entire nation, and so important for Wisconsin. So I've asked three leaders who are key to the discussion of our Census 2020 project to join me for a Newsmakers. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, a Milwaukee Democrat, who with Governor Tony Evers co-chairs the Complete Count Committee. I want to thank Corinda Rainey-Moore, Community Outreach and Engagement Manager for Kids First, who also serves on the Complete Count Committee, and Dan Veroff is an outreach specialist with the Applied Population Lab at UW-Madison and the UW Extension. Thank you very much. It's such an important issue, Census 2020. I'll tell you what, let's each talk about just how important the census is to Wisconsin. Governor, would you go first?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, and happy Census Day to everybody. It's an important conversation that we should all be having, even in the midst of this COVID-19 epidemic, because the fact is the census dictates federal funding, and it also dictates the allocation of congressional seats across the country. And, you know, we lost a congressional seat 10 years ago. So it's important for us to make sure we get an accurate count as possible. One of the bright sides is that Wisconsin is currently leading the nation in response rate. We're at just over 44% compared to the national average at about 36%, or the national response rate at being about 36%. So when we think about different issues that are federally funded, the census matters because that determines how many dollars come into our community.
Thank you, sir. Corinda, you want to go next, please?
Yes. First, I just want to say it's Kids Forward and not Kids First.
Thank you very much.
But absolutely, the census is actually important because when you think about money that's going into the school districts and determining what each school district needs, I think it's so important, especially as we.
Okay, well, apparently having some technical problems, we'll try to pick up Corinda of Kids Forward. Dan, you want to go next?
Sure. Happy Census Day to everybody. I'll pick up a little bit of where Corinda was going with that, which is that the census counts are really important for all of our communities because they set the baselines and the funding streams and allow us to do a lot of planning for community services, family services, food assistance programs, planning for healthcare, emergency preparedness. We're thinking a little bit about that right now, but they are really important for all of our communities and helping them have a voice in their future and to think about how to provide services that are needed locally.
Okay, Corinda, are you back?
I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. And I want to ask you to finish your statement on why, and I want to correct that. You're with Kids Forward. So tell me why the census is so important, ma'am.
I think the census is very important because it determines how much money is going into a particular community. And as we think about some of these disparities around education and healthcare, and some of the funds could be used to change some of those disparities.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's move to the process. Now, this is the first, the Constitution requires the census every 10 years, but this is the first one with online participation. So Mandela, is Wisconsin leading the nation with 44% of its residents so far responding?
Wisconsin is leading the nation. That's something we should be very proud of. And
Forward.
Part of that is, forward. Part of that is, yeah. A part of that is due to the fact that we do have an online version or the option for people to fill out the census online with a mobile-friendly version. I did mine on an iPad. We're gonna put the video out in a little bit to show people just how easy it is to get it done.
Well, it's very easy. My wife and I completed it on behalf of our household. Dan, before we go to Corinda, talk about the process and how it's different from online. What's next, and move us through the process, sir.
Well, right now we're in a self-response phase, which is most households in Wisconsin are being invited to respond via the internet. A few areas have got an invitation along with a paper form to send back and those were mostly areas that had low broadband access or where the likelihood that people in those communities would be able to respond via the internet due to various demographic characteristics. So those two forms are out there as invitations. There will be reminders going out periodically. And then finally, by about April 8th to the 16th, everybody will have received, if they haven't responded, they'll get a reminder with a form that they can send out. And after that, starting in May or so, the Census Bureau will start their non-response follow-up period, which will be everybody who hasn't responded, every household who hasn't responded will get a call or an in-person visit to try to get their census response.
Thank you very much. Corinda, the process of counting kids and children. Now, is this the process, will it be in May when people will actually knock on people's doors that is so important to counting the children that you're so passionate about?
Yes, it will be in May, where they will be, if responded to the census, they'll be going door to door. And if you would like for them to not come door to door, we're encouraging folks to get the census done prior to May. The sooner the better, and we want to make sure that every child is counted. So it's so important that you count everyone that's in the household, whether they're big or small, whether it's a new baby or not, whether they're adopted or, you know, just any kid that's living in your home. April 1st, then that kid should be counted.
What are the implications, Corinda, for an undercount involving the children that you're so passionate about, ma'am?
Well, the indications is that if kids are not counted, then we will not be receiving the dollars that are so much needed in the community, especially with what's going on today with this COVID and the impact that that's having on families. These resources are actually going to be needed even more so now than ever before. So it's very important that we get an accurate count so that the dollars can follow the numbers.
Mandela, you represented Milwaukee in the Assembly, and I know your heart for Milwaukee. Talk about the implication of an undercount for Wisconsin's largest city, please.
Yeah, so well, we saw the implications again 10 years ago when we lost a congressional seat. I think that is that's the biggest example, the best example that can be provided, because it means less representation for people. And it also, a complete count gives us a more accurate picture of what the community actually looks like. And if you look at historically undercounted communities, which include children, which include low-income people, communities of color, and immigrant populations, if they aren't counted in the census, if these populations are missing from that census data, then that means that when decisions are being made, oftentimes these communities are going to be left out of the decision-making process, and that's the most unfortunate thing that we're that can possibly happen. I mean, the dollars are one thing, but it's also the recognition that these communities exist. That is the biggest. That's a bigger problem long-term, in my opinion.
Mandela, before I get to Dan, do you have a concern that, like 10 years ago, Wisconsin might again lose another U.S. House seat, sir?
Well, that is a concern, because our population isn't growing at the same rate of a lot of other states, and that would be very unfortunate. And I was talking with someone online, one of my actually very, 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 very conservative friends, and he said that the real battle over maps is going to be when Wisconsin loses a congressional seat. And I said, touche.
Oh, understand.
Hopefully we don't. And that's why we need everybody to make sure that we participate, so that we can have representation in Congress, and we can have we need to at least keep the amount of districts that we have, so people can be more accurately represented, gerrymandering aside.
Dan, the context of Census 220. Let's talk about some background issues. The issue of counting those that are here illegally, especially with the backdrop of an attempt to say, are you a citizen? Now, that's not on the U.S. Census form that I've already completed. Counting the homeless. What about counting college students who are now, unfortunately, back home? And so Madison is not having, tens of thousands of college students. And what about the implication of people fearful of participating because of the health emergency? Now, I know I've covered 4 issues, so that's a lot, but could you talk about the unique challenges with this census, sir?
Well, I think that the fact that there isn't a citizenship question helps us a little bit in terms of the counting of everybody who's here, regardless of status. It's the same message as it has been in the prior two censuses, which is that the census is absolutely confidential. The information shared in the census cannot be used by any other federal agency. The Census Bureau has very strict laws and defines happen if that information is shared. So I think it's the main message is it's safe, it's confidential, it's important. And the census does count everybody who's here on, the mythical April 1st Census Day, where we are right now today. So regardless of status, regardless of, citizenship, people are counted in place where they are on April 1st. The situation with COVID-19 and college students is a little challenging, and the Census Bureau has put out a lot of information to messaging about where college students should be counted. They should be counted where they would have been on April 1st. That is, the ones that are in dorms or in off-campus housing. They should try to fill out that form as if they were in, say, Madison on April 1st, not wherever they are if they've left Madison. You asked about the homeless population. There is a big effort. It's called T-Night, or right now it's escaping me what the T stands for, but the idea is for a period of 3 days, census workers will go out to known locations where people who are experiencing homelessness are and try to do a point-in-time count. They would go to food pantries, soup kitchens, shelters, and try to get as accurate a count of homeless population as possible. That may have changed, obviously, because census field operations have been suspended for at least 2 weeks.
For at least 2 weeks. Wow.
I'm going to guess it's going to be longer, but at least.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that will extend the process, the deadlines for completing the census when you have these postponements?
Well, I know that the Census Bureau has extended their self-response deadline out to August 14th, okay. Which is quite a generous bump in how long people have. So self-response can happen for that period of time, but the other non-response follow-up, that encouragement from the Census Bureau to fill out your form, or even door-to-door visits will start to happen as well. But that is the one deadline that I know has been extended out to August 14th.
Corinda and Mandela, let me ask you this. Is there more reluctance? Are you sensing more reluctance on the parts of Wisconsin's minority communities to participate in the census because of some of these national issues that are being debated? Corinda, you want to go first, please?
Well, I think that there's a whole wham of a lot of reasons why folks are hesitant to fill out the census, and partly what's going on is my. Okay,
if we've lost Corinda, I hope she comes back. And Mandela, Corinda, are you back? Hopefully. Okay, she'll be dialing back in. Lieutenant Governor, your thoughts? Is there more reluctance?
Yeah, I won't say that I've personally seen the reluctance this time around. However, there is a hesitation. There is always a distrust by communities that have been underserved. There's a reason that people distrust government. So I've been trying to do a lot of work. And that's the reason also why we have our Complete Count Committee. That's why we made it so diverse, to make sure that we are having credible messengers that can go out in the communities and talk about the census and can relay that this, yes, is in fact something that's safe, secure, and confidential, and it is a benefit to communities, and not something that's going to be used to spy on you. And also, I need to correct myself, because I've been saying 10 years ago the census. I meant 20 years ago. Yeah, that's right. Losing the congressional seats.
That's when Mr. Barrett lost his seat. Now, Mayor Barrett. Yes, that's right. 20 years ago. Thanks for the correction, and I should have caught that. somebody covering the Capitol. Corinda, welcome back. Finish your thoughts on whether there is a reluctance by members of the minority community to complete census forms, and if so, why?
Well, I think there, I won't say that folks are reluctant to complete it. I think folks don't actually necessarily always make the connection as to why it's so important. So I think that the more we can educate folks on the importance of it, where the dollars will be going and how the dollars will be impacting them, I think will help with some of that. I also worry that because of what's going on day to day, that it's not going to be a primary concern for folks. So I think it's important that we keep it in the forefront of people's mind that the census is still happening and that the census still matters even more so now than before.
Governor Evers asked for 1.1 million as a state match to work on the census. That was not approved. Now, I know there'll be another package coming recommended by the governor and legislative leaders. Do you expect the governor to again ask for 1.1 million to facilitate and fund the state census effort?
I don't know what the exact figure will be that the governor will request, but it should be some that is close to that $1.1 million to make sure that we can do all that we can to push and make sure that Wisconsin is number one in census response, but also, this to not fund the operation is to discount the implications that would arise if we don't get the complete count. So I hope that leaders in the legislature will understand this and recognize the severity and realize that an undercount only harms the communities that they represent, as well as every community across the state, including the ones that they represent.
Dan, I know it's a policy decision that will be made above your pay grade, but would Wisconsin's effort to comply and have the best census 2020, would it be hurt if there's no state match? Sir, just your thoughts?
Well, I've got to say yes, but also I know that Wisconsin has done extremely well in terms of response rates over the last several decades. And in 2010, there was a zero budget from the state for funding statewide census outreach and education efforts. So for whatever reason, Wisconsin does really, really well. I'm a little concerned about the emphasis on internet response and some of the more rural areas that have low broadband access, and many who may have been relying on libraries and community centers as a place to go get their internet and to be able to respond. So I think those are some challenges that, if there were some funding, would be good to address. And that kind of digital divide also happens in cities where people are not having as much access to the ability to respond via the internet. I think that I was, just full disclosure, I was a little skeptical of the idea of having internet response, but I'm a big fan now as I see these participation rates and response rates rolling in.
Dan, a quick follow-up on that issue. Is there a rural-urban divide in compliance with the census? Are rural residents less or more likely than urban to register?
It depends on the kind of rural that you're talking about, but the most remote rural areas actually have a slightly different field operation where they are visited in person, many of them. The most remote areas are visited by a Census Bureau from the start, a field worker from the start to get their census response. I think that the response rates generally over the last several decades have been very good in rural areas. It also is a place where non-response follow-up happens quite a bit. So I'm not sure that there is such a divide between rural and urban in response rates.
Okay, a question for the governor and Corinda. We've all seen the ads, come work for the Census Bureau, help us have a successful 2020 census. Do you think there are people, especially as we've seen these hundreds of thousands of people applying for jobless benefits, do you think there are people who used to be working perhaps in the hospitality industry who are now considering working for the census, or are they just not comfortable doing that? Either of you have a thought on that, please?
I don't know for sure, but I would hope that that people do consider working for the census as an option. However, this is only temporary work, but it can at least help ease some of the pain that's going on. And we hope that this is just a temporary point in time that we're in right now. We hope that this won't, if we're doing all that we can do to flatten the curve, hopefully this won't last that long, and the census will be a viable option for many people. In areas like Madison and Milwaukee, the pay went up to over $20 an hour. Because there was a shortage in attracting people to come work for the census.
Well,
I would agree with the lieutenant governor is that I think that people will be looking for work even more so now, even though it's temporary work, because it will help fill in the gaps for what they need in the short term. So I think folks will use it as an option, and I think that we should continue to promote it as an option for right now.
Well, somebody considering the idea of working for the census might ask two questions. Number one, you've both said it's temporary. How long will the job last? Number two, would I be issued health precautions like a mask? Governor, your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, certainly the way that the census is going to be administered, the way that people are going to go out and canvass is going to look a lot different, at least in the next month or so. So the precautions will have to be taken. I mean, we won't send people into harm's way. I'm sure the Census Bureau is not looking to send people into harm's way. And I do think that regardless of the temporary nature, that one, there is a need for us to get people working, and there's a need for people to connect with employment also.
Well, okay. My next question is there a penalty if someone does not register with the census? Does anybody, is there any hard and fast follow-up? Dan, your thoughts? Or go ahead, Governor.
No. Dan can take this. I was gonna say, like, the marshal isn't gonna show up to your doorstep to make you fill out the census. But Dan, please.
That said, yeah, right on the envelope and the census form, it says your response is required by law. And I think that there is a dollar amount penalty listed someplace, but this is my third census, and I've never heard of anybody being fined or having any other action taken because they didn't fill in their census form.
I want to come back to something that we opened the show with. I really want to talk about the key critical programs that rely on federal aid that are at stake and driven by census numbers. Corinda, please, first.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, schools where they decide to build new schools, and we know some communities are expanding where new schools are needed, and also like school lunches, healthcare is impacted by it, SNAP funds, early childhood funding for early childhood education. All those things are much needed funds that come to different communities. And so I think it's important that folks realize that these are dollars that's going to these resources that they need and that could help make their community a community that can thrive.
The shorthand then for your organization, KidsForward, is that these are critical to the quality of life for Wisconsin children. Correct, Corinda?
Absolutely. These are very essential to the quality of life, especially when we're thinking about those underserved communities, particularly for communities of color. And as you talked about, some of those rural areas as well, because those rural areas also need resources. And so for us, it really is about having the quality of life and having a community where everyone, particularly every child, has the ability to thrive. And without these resources, we know that they won't have that opportunity.
Governor, you worked on state budgets. Talk about how important federal aid is in the critical state programs, sir.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, you look at money that's spent on schools, hospitals, roads, which is going to always be an issue for any state. Roads, quality of roads. When are these roads going to get fixed? Why are these potholes here? Public works programs. Also, money for substance abuse and treatment programs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And without that money to help supplement some state budgets, you're going to run into a real problem. And I mean, this goes even far as like the very low to moderate income home loan program administered by the USDA. I mean, this is one end. You have the ability for states to have the funding that they need to put money into schools and to put money into roads. And also you have the funds that help residents of the state that can help them, go into purchasing a new home, become a property taxpayer. So I think that this is there's more than one end to what this funding is around to help people and help states accomplish.
Dan, you said this is your third census. What are you looking for? What numbers, what data are you looking for in this 2020 census as opposed to 2010 and 2000, sir? But potential changes?
Well, the crystal ball is always an interesting friend or foe. What I will be, when the data comes out in, April of 2021, I'll be looking at a couple of things, and the work that the Applied Population Laboratory does to analyze data, we'll be looking for a couple of things. One is how the population, the aging of the population has changed. We're expecting it to accelerate overall, that Wisconsin population, and depending on where you are, will be accelerating a lot or maybe not as much. One of the other things that we look at is the change in communities, diversity in communities, different populations of color that are growing, different immigrant populations that are growing. And then the one other thing, and we expect to see quite a bit of that, especially in rural parts of Wisconsin, with growing Latino populations. And then the final thing is to really look at patterns of population redistribution, and if you will, looking at how the urban, suburban, rural spectrum is going to be changing, and whether we need to kind of think about different ways of thinking about commuting and where work is. This COVID-19 pandemic has really changed the notion of work for a lot of people, where they're working. So it might be really interesting to see how the population, it'll be something we'll be prying into for sure.
Dan, quick follow-up. Have response rates to the census been going down 2010 and 2000?
Actually, they've been going up.
Yay, good. Glad to hear that.
So I am pleasantly surprised by where we are. It's Census Day, and as the Lieutenant Governor already said, Wisconsin has just over a 44% self-response rate. That's phenomenal. It's not. This is Census Day, and so I expect that we're going to get very, very close to our self-response and participation rates from the previous census, and maybe even eclipse them. And I don't know whether to attribute that to internet response, but I'm sure it's playing a role.
Okay, I only have two more questions. Governor, talk about the Complete Count Committee. There's a lot of talented people in that. Have they met? Has the Count Committee met? What's going to be its role? And what are your expectations, you and the governor, Governor Evers, leading the Complete Count Committee?
Oh yeah, we've absolutely met in person already. We've had a number of in-person meetings, but we haven't had those recently. And we've also had some subcommittee meetings. And one of the subcommittees is the hard to count populations, where we make sure that we have a very intentional focus on reaching those historically undercounted populations. And I'll say though, the very first meeting, we left with a charge. People who came into that meeting came in there understanding full well what the census meant and what did it mean to have a complete count, and they left and with a mission and ready to go. And people have been getting to work. I think that the numbers speak for themselves, and as far as we've gotten, I think that we can go even further. We can do even more to still win out. And we have people from very diverse backgrounds, different professions, different disciplines who are part of this committee as well, because everybody, regardless of your walk of life, is impacted. I was talking to someone who's a banker, who's a part of the Census Complete Count Committee. It's important for people in the finance industry to get an accurate count. I mean, you don't want to be in a market that looks like it's trending down in population. You want to make sure that you get as many people counted as possible to make yourself more attractive to other prospects for investment.
Okay. My final question then, this has been a very interesting interview. So I want each of you to give your elevator speech. You're in an elevator and somebody says, why should I care about the Census 2020? Census 2020, your elevator speech. Corinda, please.
I would say that you should care because the census impacts everyone, and the dollars follow the numbers. So if you're not counted, then you won't be getting those dollars to your resources. For example, if a kid is not counted at 2, that kid won't be counted until they're 12. And when you think about the resources that a kid needs in between the ages of 2 and 12, that's a lot. So the impact is huge.
Dan, your elevator speech.
Well, I think of the census as a civics lesson and an easy opportunity for everybody to have be civically engaged and to have a voice in the future of their community. The data that comes out of it is important for political representation, for planning for services, and actually, I think of it as power for communities. And so it's critically important that people participate and that the communities get as accurate and complete count as possible.
And Governor, your elevator speech, sir.
Yeah, I think it's important for you to fill out the census because if you aren't counted, then to decision makers, you don't count. And this includes resources, not just for yourself, but the greater community. If we want to see ourselves advance, if we want to see ourselves in a much better place, it's important for us to all make sure that a complete and accurate picture of our communities, of our entire state, of our entire nation is painted. So we need you to fill out the census.
Census 2020, Census 2020 Day across the nation. I want to thank Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes. I want to thank Corinda Rainey-Moore, Community Outreach and Engagement Manager for KidsForward and a member of the Complete Count Committee, and Dan Veroff, a outreach specialist with the Applied Population Lab at UW-Madison and Extension. Okay, I've already done my form. Have you guys already done yours?
I've done mine.
Okay, thanks so much. It's very important. Thanks for a very important interview. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.